We'll start with Saquon Barkley. He is RB6 in ECR. 14th overall is where he's going. Now, Andy, you are our guest, so I will start with you. Are you taking the risk on Saquon at RB6 and 14th overall?
This is, of all the players on the list that we will be discussing today, this is the one where, we're pretty deep into, like, we've all done some best ball drafts. We've probably all done some magazine mock drafts, things like that. This is the one guy where I don't have him yet. I don't feel like I'm proactively avoiding Saquon Barkley, but I do feel like there is always someone in a draft who thinks, well, someone who sees a plausible path for Saquon to finish as like the RB1, right? And they're taking him back half of round 1, or they're taking him at or near the turn in round 2. And that's not where I'm at. I think there are more headwinds in Philadelphia than maybe everybody's accounting for, right? I think it's the fact that Jalen Hurts is his quarterback and is just simply not going to feed him 90 targets. I think that's one thing. The fact that Jalen Hurts is his quarterback and is also the primary goal line rusher, or has been in recent years for Philadelphia, I think is another thing. It's not to say that Jalen's going to finish with, a dozen 1-yard touchdowns again, or whatever it was last year. But, he calls his own number at the goal line. The Eagles call his number at the goal line. He's great at it. So I don't see the path to Saquon necessarily leading the league in scrimmage yards. I don't necessarily see the path to Saquon finishing with, 16, 18 touchdowns, that kind of total. I think he's fine. He's a really good player, deep into his career, got some miles on him now. And I just don't end up with him. I've also, I've ranked my way into a situation where I've got some guys who I think consensus has, buried in the 3rd round or whatever, who I have ahead of Saquon. And that really affects who I get.
Yeah, it's funny, talking about Hurts as like the goal line option. I've seen a couple people say this, and I've said this too on shows during the offseason about how with Jason Kelce retiring, maybe the tush push isn't as effective. That also is going to impact Saquon running the ball. They're losing an elite center. That hurts the tush push. It also hurts, opening up lanes to a degree when you have a downgrade at such an important position for Saquon. I always like to ask people this, Andy, because I think it's a really informative question to kind of just see how analysts think about this. But when you have a running back who joins an offense that has a mobile quarterback, do you tend to more like the fact that it's going to maybe make him more efficient and open up running lanes because of the threat of Hurts running? Or is it more of a downgrade for you in the stuff you already mentioned, going to see fewer targets and, the goal line stuff as well? Do you see it more as a benefit or a downgrade when any running back joins any offense with a mobile quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, the silver lining, if you want to find one, is that there are presumably a lot more yards before contact available in the offense, certainly to Saquon, given where he was last year and the circumstances in which he's been running for the last couple seasons, versus what he's going to face in the year ahead, right? He's going to get a much cleaner path past the line of scrimmage than he's had, I think, in recent seasons. But again, the problem is, we start, when you're evaluating strictly for fantasy purposes, we care an awful lot about what is a reasonable projection for you as a receiver, and are you going to dominate the goal line? And it's not like I don't think he's going to, he's probably going to reach 10 rushing touchdowns. He'll reach 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns, something like that. But I just DeAndre Swift was just there, and he played a full season, and he's one of the best receiving backs of this era, and he caught 39 passes. So I don't. Do I think that Saquon is all of a sudden going to be back in the conversation for 65 catches, 75 catches? I very much doubt it.
Debra, what do you think about Saquon? Is he somebody that you're, targeting and willing to take the risk in this range, or are you looking elsewhere?
It's not that I dislike a lot of the same points that Andy made. I don't dislike Saquon, but I do find myself going in other directions. It's either I'm pressing the button on wide receivers this part of the draft, or I'm just willing to draft Jahmyr Gibbs. And people could say, well, you're going to say you don't want Saquon Barkley, but you think he's too risky, but you're willing to go with Jahmyr Gibbs, who's still going to be sharing a backfield with David Montgomery. And I'm like, yeah, I sure am. Because there's a lot of to like out of Jahmyr Gibbs. We know, there's been tons of awesome work that's done in the space. Shout out to Ryan Heath with Fantasy Points that's done a lot of the work talking about second-year backs and getting the bump in volume. But I want to go back to last season. Weeks 10 through 18 for Gibbs, I don't look at him as being a very risky pick, and the upside is definitively there. Looking at what happened over that stretch after David Montgomery came back, like this was Gibbs' backfield.
Mm-hmm.
And any way we want to stretch it, man, like Gibbs owns 65.4% of the snaps on passing downs, which won't really blow anybody's mind. But if you were to talk about the red zone usage, he outpaced David Montgomery in red zone rushing attempts. So I don't think people are understanding that 28 to 26, as well as he massively outsnapped David Montgomery inside of the 20. 63.4% of the snaps inside the red zone were Jahmyr Gibbs. So while even the touch totals inside the goal line, and we know he has the passing downs on lock, which I could still paint you an easy case that passing down ceiling could go up, considering out of 48 qualifying quarterbacks last year, Jared Goff was only 38th in check down rate. So that can go up this season, and we could see even more out of Jahmyr Gibbs. So if I'm in that range and I'm wanting to press the button on a running back, it's not Saquon Barkley, and it is Jahmyr Gibbs every single time.
Andy, it looks like you've got Gibbs ahead of Barkley as well in your rankings.
I do, yeah. And that's part of why I don't get Barkley, like whether we're mocking, whether it's best ball, whatever. And, to Derek's point, like Jared Goff is not taking those goal line carries, right? There was so much work inside the 5 and inside the 10 for running backs in Detroit last year. It doesn't even really matter if Gibbs isn't getting, 100% of that work. There's so much of it. It's pretty unreasonable to think that Detroit won't again be an offense that averages 28, 30, 32 points per game, right? We're talking about one of the NFL's elite offenses, and none of that goal line, like the most valuable touches in the game for a running back. We don't have to worry about any of that going to Goff. We can reasonably expect Jared Goff to throw to the running backs a fair amount. I like everything about Gibbs's. The only thing that you could really say about Saquon is I suppose you could talk yourself into there being a path for him to be like a 380 touch player if everything goes right. But again, I don't know that I like the shape of those touches as much as I do for Gibbs.
All right, next running back on the list, Kyren Williams. Debra, I'll start with you this time. He is RB8, 19th overall is where he is ranked currently. Are you taking the risk on Kyren?
I am taking the risk on Kyren, and that might surprise people considering, the foot injury stuff they were worried about in the offseason, the size of the player and stuff. Here, the fact of it is that is there some risk to absolve here? Sure. But that's also why we're looking at Kyren Williams at RB8 and he's not a top 5 running back. I think some of that risk is baked in and still the price, okay, still a top 24 player. But again, I'm willing to take that risk because in this Rams offense, if he can stay healthy, we know what we're getting. We're getting probably a top 5 back. Blake Corum is still there, but I don't think that he's going to be the lead back, much less even play 35% of the snaps. He's probably the guy that's going to salt away the clock if the Rams, the defense, bounces back and plays well this year. He's the guy in the positive game script. But if games are close or they're trailing, I think this is still all Kyren Williams' backfield. And looking at what he did before the injury is something I specifically want to highlight. I could talk about days about his touch counts, the snap counts, and all that kind of stuff. But the efficiency we saw out of Kyren Williams at the beginning of the season, so weeks 1 through 6, before he got hurt, that's something I specifically want to highlight here because he had a 28% missed tackles forced per attempt rate. His yards after contact per attempt was 3.0. And to add another layer of context for people, if he would have kept up that level of breaking tackles over an entire season, it would have ranked him 4th in missed tackles forced, tied with Bijan Robinson, and 9th ahead of Jonathan Taylor in yards after contact per attempt. So if we do get the health, we know the role is amazing, and some of that risk is baked into his ADP.
Andy, I'm curious what you think about Kyren because I find him to be one of the most fascinating players to talk about as we enter draft season. There was basically nobody that was more fun to roster besides maybe Christian McCaffrey when he was healthy, but he wasn't always healthy. They did draft a running back on day 2. I mean, how are you evaluating him right now?
So I think to a point that has already been made, one of the things that they liked most about Blake Corum what was his similarity to Kyren Williams, right? Right. So that speaks well for Kyren's role and the job security that he has. I actually think that, just based on reading tea leaves and everything that Sean McVay has said about the foot issue with Williams, I don't think anybody should be worried about it. Like, whatever, it's an injury, you want to worry about it, you're free to worry about it. But they had him doing work on the side, and the other thing about the Rams, and this is actually like something that I sort of vowed to carry from last season into this season. They're very honest with us. Like, if all you did last offseason, last summer, in terms of draft prep, was just listen to what like people associated with the Rams and their beat writers were saying, you had a great year. Because they were screaming at us that Puka Nacua was better than advertised, and like their social team was just flooding the internet with Puka Nacua clips. They told us very early on and very consistently that, hey, Matt Stafford looks like old Matt Stafford. He's slinging the ball, which turned out to be 100% true. And then sort of late in camp, a lot of Kyren Williams buzz too. And maybe this is his job more than it's Cam Akers' job. And they were straight up with us. And so that, but on the other hand, they love Blake Corum, and they're talking up Blake Corum right now in almost exactly the same way that they were hyping Puka Nacua last year. And I do think he's going to be a real factor. But to a point that's already been made, it is a little bit baked into Kyren Williams' draft price, right? Like, if we're not, had there been no Blake Corum, or if they drafted like some, day 3 running back that, you could build a case for, but was more a contingent value guy than any sort of threat, anything like that, we would be taking Kyren Williams in the first round. Like, he would be, I don't know exactly where he would fall overall for me, but it would probably be like overall 9 or 10, something like that. Absolutely dominant. Like, you talked about what he did before the injury. After the injury, when we needed him most in fantasy, he was like 120 scrimmage yards per game, and he scored every week. So he was great. He absolutely carried you through the fantasy postseason. So I think this is a great player. I think he's probably appropriately priced. I've landed him. I will tell you, though, that I did give you an alternative target when we were prepping this thing, and my alternative target here is Isaiah Pacheco. I think I'm on Pacheco Island, which is a little bit weird, but I view him as I think he's a plausible round 1 player. I never have to take him there. I have absolutely no questions whatsoever about what his role is going to be. I thought he was one of the biggest offseason winners, right? Because Kansas City did all these things to upgrade the quality of their offense without touching the backfield around Pacheco. Like, that is 100% Pacheco's job as long as he stays healthy. He demonstrated last year that he's an excellent receiving threat. Like, that's in his bag. He can do that. I think he's a sneaky candidate to finish as the RB1 overall. He seriously just needs to stay healthy. He's tied to the best quarterback in the game. He's tied to potentially the best offense in the game. I think it's an ideal situation. And the fact that we haven't seen him deliver like a 1,600 or 1,700 yard season yet, that doesn't mean it can't happen. He's certainly teed up for it. So that's one example of a guy that I just happen to like a little bit better than Kyren Williams right now. But I've got nothing bad to say about Kyren.
You are on Pacheco Island. I would actually pull this up even before you brought that up. On Fantasy Pros, you can go to an individual player and click rankings, and you can see where everybody has them and who is highest on a player. And correct me if this is not up to date, but in half PPR amongst running backs, he's RB4 for you is how we have it listed. Nobody else has him higher than RB6. So you are 2 full spots ahead of anybody else at the position in terms of how you're ranking Pacheco. So you are...
I will also tell you that, like, I go through a process of, just projecting each player in as, non-emotional a way as I can do it. And he's actually a little higher than that in projections. And I was like, no, that's going to seem insane. I gotta lower him a little bit. I don't see any impediments here. I don't see what's stopping us from making him a first round pick. I thought everybody loved him too. Like, I thought he was everybody's sleeper when he came into the league, and now we're kind of off him.
I was looking also at just like on the Yahoo page rankings, and this is overall, not at running back. And it was, all your coworkers and colleagues have it 29th overall, 27th, 39th, and you've got him 10th overall on the site. So definitely up there. Debro, what do you make of Pacheco this year quickly?
I like him. I think that he's right on that cusp of being an RB1. I'm not going to push back hard about Pacheco because the thing that he gets access to this year, no Jerick McKinnon, Like, CEH is not coming for that workhorse role. We know Pacheco, and we saw this last year. I mean, he's going to play 70% of the snaps, maybe even freaking higher. I think the only thing that pushes me a little bit back from where Andy is I just wonder, with Patrick Mahomes and now all the receiving weapons, like, what is the touchdown equity for Pacheco? And that's the biggest thing, where it's like, we look at all these different offensive situations and it's like, where do the touchdowns go? What does that look like? Like, would I be absolutely surprised if Pacheco ended up with like a James Conner type of season? Like in the sense of he spikes 12 to 15 touchdowns? No. Is it hard for me to kind of get there? Like, do I think he probably ends up in the 7 to 10 range? Possibly. And that's kind of where I wonder if the difference is. Like, how many touchdowns do you think he spikes this year, Andy?
Yeah, I think 7 to 10 touchdowns requires an injury that causes him to miss like 3 weeks.
Okay.
I think if he gives us 16 or 17 games, and like, you never assume that for any running back. But I do think if he gives us 16 or 17 games, it's going to be hard, given what I would expect for Kansas City's offense generally, for him to avoid 14, 15, 16 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably where he finishes, even though, like, huge caveat, the Chiefs will do some, I don't need to, it's not breaking any news to say that the Chiefs will do the wildest stuff when they get inside the 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they will scheme the weirdest things for McCole Hardman, for like the third tight end, for the rugby player that they saw. So, like, if you want to fret about those things, I totally get it. But, I don't see anybody. I don't see anyone in his way, and I don't see anyone who's even an inconvenience to him in this offense right now.
So to Andy's point, I guess right now, like, I'm looking at the odds on betting pros. I should be slamming the over 7.5 rushing touchdowns at plus money. I need to put that bet in now.
Yeah.
Some of us may have taken that already.
May have already done it.
Love it.
All right, let's go to another running back here. DeVon Achane, maybe the ultimate like boomer bust guy in terms of what we see week to week, in terms of what he could be this season. Maybe some theoretical questions about health and role and whatever, but the speed and the fit in the offense is absolutely sublime. Andy, I'll start with you here. He's RB11 and 35th overall. Are you taking the risk on Achane there?
Yeah, I love him, and I've landed him a few times. So this is certainly not a player that I avoid. This, I will say, this is another case where I just happen to have some guys ranked. I'm an outlier in the industry on probably a couple different running backs, so I do have some dudes that are ahead of him. It's really hard not to love the player, right? Like 800 rushing yards or whatever it was on like 100 carries is stupid. And then like 20% plus of his carries went for 10 or more yards. I mean, it was just one of the most ridiculously efficient seasons that we've seen in the fantasy era in NFL history, right? Whether that's actually sustainable, I think we know the answer to that question, right? Like, nobody comes in at 8 yards per carry or 7.8 or whatever it was last year. Like, that's probably not going to be where this guy settles in. But in fairness to the Dolphins and every great thing that they did last year, that offense finds big plays for a whole bunch of guys. So it's not going to surprise me if we see more workload out of him. I think everybody knows the offseason story on Achane, added muscle, right? Like, and of course, this was going to be an issue for a guy whose like primary attribute was speed in the past, and who in every season prior to this one basically was like preparing himself for a track season when the NFL season ended, right? Which involves like, you can't get up to like 225, 230 and be, and run 10-1 or 10 flat. So like, it's awesome that he's actually like adding mass. I think that's pretty necessary. He didn't seem like somebody who was ever really going to be able to hold up to a full NFL workload at the size that he entered the league. And maybe that's still a problem, but I think it speaks well to his role and what they expect for him moving forward, that he's like, he seems to have successfully put on a little bit of mass. I think he's great. There are guys that I take ahead of him, but I have landed him in a handful of leagues, and he's just one of those huge range of outcomes guys, right? Because Mostert isn't going to go away unless Raheem Mostert, who is now very old by the standards of the position, and has been injury prone in the past, that could definitely happen again. And then all of a sudden we're looking at Achane with as much work as he could possibly handle. If that happens, he has a chance to finish as a top 5 running back.
D-Bro, are you taking the swing on Achane here?
Oh yeah, definitely taking the swing. I mean, and just to Andy's points, like, does he reproduce the outlier efficiency season that he had in his rookie year? Probably not. But we do see a lot of outlier guys, and it's just like, because I remember after Alvin Kamara's rookie season, everybody's like, okay, he can't produce like that yards per carry mark again. And I'm not saying that DeVon Achane reproduces that, but could he get the goal line role in this offense where we just saw Raheem Mostert spike over 20 touchdowns? He was fifth in red zone touches. That could go to Achane this year. And if that does happen, even in a split backfield, like, I'm not telling you that DeVon Achane is going to turn into like a 20, 23 touch per game kind of guy, but 12, 15, maybe 16 touches and split some of that to the passing game. And if he gets the goal line work for a player that was RB5 in fantasy points per game, again, the risk of some of these metrics sliding back and the ambiguity of this backfield is baked into his price. Even though it's still hefty, it's still baked in because what we saw last year and how he produced. So yes, like, for a player, and I feel like we're at the exact same spot we were last year. Like, we walked into last season, we're like, I know the Dolphins are going to put up points. Don't know who I need to be drafting out of this backfield. And here we are staring at the same thing again this year. I'm not making the same mistake of last year. I'm just going to draft a ton of Dolphins backs. Like, I want exposure to all these guys, whether it's Achane early, Mostert somewhere in the middle rounds, or drafting all the Jalen Wright late. I want to take shots on all these guys.
Where are you drafting Achane, D-Bro? Is he somebody that you're taking like early third round? Is he somebody that you're seeing if you can let slide later? Is he somebody you're reaching the back end of the second round because the upside is so ridiculous? Where are you actually clicking draft on him?
I've got Achane, and I'm ahead of consensus. So right now, RB11, 35th overall. I've got him at, DeVon Achane, where are you at? I've got him at 25th overall. So I'm willing to take him in the second round of drafts, early third, depending on, league size and things like that. I definitely want to be ahead of ADP, though.
Andy, where are you drafting Achane in the leagues where you're getting him?
Where, I've had a couple of mocks in which I've got him like round 4, middle of round 4. They're, among the players, I guess I'll just, Pacheco, obviously somebody that I have ahead of him if I've got him at RB4. I am always surprised when he goes ahead, and this is like consensus at, NFC right now. This is consensus a lot of places, but Achane goes pretty consistently in a lot of spots.